Dr. Sophie Messager, and this is the Wisdom Messenger podcast. In this show, I interview pioneers in women's health and personal development about groundbreaking concepts that help women reclaim lost knowledge and restore inner wisdom. By bridging insights from ancient traditions and modern research, we question stale cultural narratives and midwife a new paradigm around birth, life transitions, and women's autonomy. Join me as we delve into stories and studies that empower women to reconnect with their inner voice and live their truth. Tune in as we rediscover what it means to fully trust ourselves and shape our collective future. In this episode, I interview Barbara Gail, a dancer, percussionist, and mentor in rhythm and drum teaching. We have a wide-ranging discussion covering various topics related to drumming, music, dance, education, cultural tradition, and empowering women. We explore the therapeutic benefits of participatory rhythm and movement practices across different cultures. So welcome to this new episode of the Wisdom Messenger podcast. In today's episode, I'm interviewing Barbara Gail, who is a dancer and percussionist and a rhythm and hand drum teacher and an alchemist in the teaching, performing and ritual arts. And I'm delighted to have you here with us today, Barbara. And I'd like to ask you, because you've got such an interesting background that spans education, dance, yoga, and various wisdom traditions, I'd like to ask you, what initially drew you to the power of rhythm and movement as a transformative force for your life and work?
Well, hi, Sophie. It's so nice to meet you, finally, having met you online. And thank you for this opportunity to have a conversation. So yeah, how was I drawn to the power of this? Well, I mean, I could say even as a child, I was really drawn to music in a big way, and I was always dancing. When I was about 3 years old and I was in a restaurant with my parents, I suddenly got up from the table and started dancing. And they were like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm dancing to the music." I could hear the music that was playing in the restaurant, and it moved me, and I had to dance. And all my birthday parties, we were dancing. And anytime friends or cousins came over, the records would go on and we would be dancing. And anytime I heard live music, which was not often, but I can picture myself as a very, very little girl at some kind of event where there was a live band, and I was so mesmerized. I was standing in front of the band and by the speaker, and I was just hooked into the music. I was transported. I don't know where I was. I was just there. So I think that that's just something that was in me. And I could have gone down the path of any of the arts. I was a really creative kid. I was writing poems and writing music on the guitar, my own folk songs when I was a teen. I was drawing and painting. I was in the art room all the time through high school. That was my saving grace and my therapy through the high school years, was drawing and painting in the art room of the school. And then in college, I thought, oh, I can actually study dance. I didn't realize that. I was always dancing to music. I didn't know that I could study it. So then I was dancing 6 days a week while I was studying the arts as experiential education for both personal evolution and transformation, and also the evolution and transformation of society and culture and the collective, the tribe. So I was already in those, years between age 19 and 22, I was already now tapping into the role of the arts, creative expression, as a means for human learning. We learn through play. Little humans try on all kinds of things and learn through play, and other animals do too, actually. If we watch lion cubs and how they play fighting and play stalking, it's how we learn. And humans are just so creative, not just in art for art's sake, but the clothing that we wear and the the shelters that we build to live in, the food that we grow and create. It's all creativity. So how does that act in humans transform us individually and collectively? And I think that it really came to a head for me in 1991. I was in my early 30s. No, I wasn't even 30 yet. I was in my late 20s, and I met my first teacher with a capital T, Gabrielle Roth, who birthed a body of work that she ended up branding as the 5 rhythms. But back then it was called shamanic dance and ecstatic dance. And it was a formless form of dance that anyone could do that was really based on a dynamic flow of energy that changes. And each of these rhythms, as she called it, which are like dynamic forms of energy that we can move in different ways through, with and through, each of those rhythms have a teaching. And there are rhythms within rhythms, and there are deeper teachings about life and who we are on this planet, and ego work and shadow work, as well as tapping into joy. So I thought, oh, well, here's a form of dance that I not only relate to, and actually before I met Gabrielle, I took a workshop with one of her proteges on the coast of Maine. I was living in Maine at the time. I lived in Maine for 20 years, which for those of you who don't know is the most northeastern state of the US. Chris Werner, that was her name. And I had found the dance form because I continued dancing even beyond college. I continued studying, and I was just local community performance groups. But I had found a dance form that I felt that, as someone who studied experiential education and wanted to do something with teaching, with sharing, as well as the expression, the creativity, I found the form that I felt everyone could participate in, and that it was not just so that we could express and we could be creative, but that we could also grow and evolve through because of its deeper teachings. So I went on to continue studying with Gabrielle to become one of her proteges. And only 2 years after I met Gabrielle, I met Layne Redmond, the author of When the Drummers Were Women, A Spiritual History of Rhythm. I had already been introduced to West African drumming by John McDowell in 1988 and was playing the djembe. And then here comes this woman who is telling us that thousands of years ago, women were the drummers, and there is a spiritual history to rhythm, to the drum, and it too has deeper meaning. Like, why do we drum? We love drumming like we love dancing. It feels good. It can be cathartic. It connects us to people. It can be healing. It's all of those things. And why? Do we ever ask ourselves why? Why do we drum? Why do we dance? Just because it feels good? Okay, so it feels good. Well, why does it feel good? What's its role in our lives? So I think that was just the path that led me into, from the mid-90s into the rest of my life, which has been a constant budding and blossoming and fruiting and reseeding since then. So for nearly 30 years. And that's all I've been doing full time. We developed the rhythm Inlet, which focused on the folkloric percussive hand drums instruments from around the world, as a retail store and a teaching studio and community programs. And it's all I've done. And so whatever led me to that is still a thread in me now. And now here I am at 62 years old with a new chapter in my life, and bringing me to people like yourself. And well, not like you're all unique, but opportunities like this.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for this new chapter and helping me to evolve and grow with my life's work. It's always I guess, been my purpose with
Mm.
rhythm and movement, hand drumming and dance, and to share that with people of all ages, abilities, and challenges. And that has helped me to grow. And it's in over 400 venues and thousands of people from the preschool age to the elderly in memory care and all kinds of populations, various populations of people in between, from normal, everyday neurotic adults to at-risk youth to autistic children to, I mean, you name it. I've probably brought drums and bells and shakers and boomers and bangers and dingers and dongers and clingers and clangers
Mm.
to those populations. And so I think it's taken me for a ride. I
Mm.
just stepped onto the path. I said, oh, this is interesting. I like this dance work. I like this drum work. And suddenly I had the shaman of the dance and the priestess of the drum. And we don't need to say shamaness for Gabrielle. We don't need to say shamaness or shawoman. I know some people like those titles, but Layne taught us that the word shaman was originally referring to a woman.
Mm.
So the shaman of the dance and the priestess of the drum, and they became my teachers, and it bubbled up from inside me a fusion of my own innate knowing and fusing their teachings, as well as I've had a lot of opportunities with a lot of teachers in person because there was no online back then.
Yeah.
All in person, getting in the car or on a bus or a plane and traveling to be with that teacher for an immersion, whether it was for a weekend
Mm.
or a week. And just, yeah, alchemizing all that I was learning and sharing it because I can't help but share it. I'm not a solo practitioner. I don't learn all those things so I can stay home and dance and stay home and drum. I have to share.
Mm.
So that's been my path.
Wonderful. I
Thank
really
you.
like what you said about something everybody can do, because something I've noticed is that drumming, dancing, and singing
And singing.
belong to every culture. And yet in the West, we've come to think only special people can, like, you have to have trained to be good enough. And I find that so very sad, that people think they can't do that thing because, or they have to do it in a very self-conscious, or they have to do it in away from anybody being able to watch them, when it's so
Absolutely.
innate to humanity and it's so innate to children. Children don't worry about the way they look, sound, or bang the drum, when they just like, and how we lose that. I think it's very important to bring it back.
Oh, I love that. It's true. I mean, one of my teachers, Randy Crafton, said that there hasn't been a traditional culture on the planet without some form of rhythm in its expression. And I would add to that with some form of movement, with
Yeah.
some form of singing, the drum, the song, the dance, um, even making pictures on caves
Yeah.
7,000 years ago. I think that it's all innate. And I agree, children are naturally drawn to rhythm. They're naturally singing. They're moving all the time. Watch children standing in a line waiting for their lunch in the cafeteria at school, and they're all moving. They're
Yeah.
constantly moving. So I do think that it's innate. And I do think that in our culture, we have glorified the artists who have disciplined themselves and structured their lives in such a way that they refine their art. And that's a beautiful thing too, to get to the point as a visual artist, for instance, to then have your work in a gallery or a museum,
Yeah.
or a musician to then perform on stage, whether it's a local community center or Carnegie Hall,
Mm.
or for a dancer to dance for the community at an event, or again on stage for a bigger audience. That's an amazing thing. And yet we as audience are passive
Mm.
to enjoy the music, listen to it, take it in, maybe tap our toes, to watch the dance and to watch the music and feel something. Maybe we're moved by it, whether it makes us angry or it's moving us to tears because it touches us emotionally, listening to a song that we relate to, or looking at a painting or a sculpture that is just so beautiful and moving. So we participate on that kind of level. But what happened to participatory arts? What happened to participatory music and dance, where everyone in the tribe, if you're not drumming, then you're dancing. And if you're not dancing, then you're singing and clapping from a very young age and of multi-generations. And there are still places in the world where that happens. And we've traveled to some of them, like in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, Northeast Canada, where people still gather in the kitchen to form a kitchen band, multi-generations. And we've traveled there, we loved it. And then we went to a barn dance, and everyone there of all generations are dancing together, the traditional Cape Breton form of dance. And it was amazing and wonderful. And then in the barn, which is this huge space, and there's live music, one of the musicians was the gal who was at the info booth the day before when we were entering a park where we wanted to go for a hike and a bike ride. And she was in the info booth giving us the information of where to go. And now she's one of the musicians in the live band for the dance.
Yeah.
And the same thing in Bahia, Brazil, where we've traveled to, where everyone is singing and clapping and dancing, and yet some of those people are really struggling, in their lives with basic needs, just maintaining basic needs of life. And yet the joy that's expressed in their music, in their dance, in their song, and everyone's participating. You see the smallest children to the grandmothers. Yeah, what happened to that in our culture? So part of our purpose with the Rhythm Inlet was to bring everyday people into that. When we look at this photo of this woman with a drum, all we really know, this is one of Layne's slides, and all we really know is that she's Greek. That's the only thing that Layne told us. I could say that she's a woman with a frame drum in ancient times, and she plays her drum and sings lullabies to her children. Maybe she actually plays her drum and sings songs with her friends. Maybe they sing and drum and dance within the community. Maybe she has authority in her community as a spiritual leader through her drumming and singing and dancing. And she actually has a position of leadership within the community. It could be any one of those things. And so I think that we today are returning to this idea of, oh, maybe I can drum. I have a woman in my djembe class right now, a West African form of there's a djembe right there.
Yeah.
West African form of drumming. And she's a woman of a certain age. And she told us in class that this is her first musical instrument she has ever learned to play. And that's the beauty of, I think, we can all move. We can all sing. If you can walk, you can dance. If you can talk, you can sing. And we can all drum as long as we get out of our own way. I've had a student who said the only thing I ever learned to play was the radio. But the drum is just such a natural thing, and we can bring together a circle of people, and in 1 hour's time, they're making music together.
Yeah.
You can't necessarily do that with a group of violin players or saxophone players who have never touched a violin or a saxophone. I don't know that they'd be making music in harmony together in the first hour, but with the drum, you can do that. So that's kind of been our thing, participatory music.
Yeah.
And dance.
And I really liked what you said here about some of those people have really difficult life circumstances, because one of the things I've come to believe is, that's my personal belief through reading various people's work, is that one of the reasons we have so much trauma in the West is because we no longer have communal trance.
Communal what? Communal
trance. Those those gatherings, those informal gatherings that would be part of every culture, every generation of people moving and making music, making sound, making movement together. It was a way to discharge any stuck energies. It was a way to change your consciousness and kind of release whatever was stagnant. And I'm really convinced that not having that, I'm writing a book about women and drumming, and I refound a quote from an article from 10 years ago, where I'm talking about how the Western model only talks to the head as a separate entity to the body to address mental health. And I found this article, and after the genocide in Rwanda, they sent Western therapists to help heal people from the trauma. And this man said, the absolutely beautiful quote, "They didn't take us in the sunshine to get us to feel the sun, the warmth of the sun on our skin. They didn't take us drumming or singing or dancing. They didn't make sure that the whole community had taken a day off to help heal our sadness. Instead, they took us into dark, dingy little room and made us talk about the horrible thing that happened to us. We had to ask them to leave."
Yeah.
And I was like, this is like...
Yes.
It's so, in the West, we're so here in our head, like if our body is just a vehicle for the brain. And then you can see that in how we express, like headquarters, head teachers, head this, head that, and the head has value, but if it's not integrated with the body and where the movement and the rhythm and the singing and all of that, it affects everything. And that's why I found it such an incredible transformative tool. And I wonder if you have any stories to share from your experience. I know you said you've worked with many different populations. Any story that really sticks into your mind of transformation, beyond this elderly lady would never play the drum? Did you have any kind of really powerful story that you'd like to share about that?
Several. And I love what you're saying too. And I even tell my students, I'm teaching you cognitively, cerebrally, and yet I want you to subconsciously and in your body feel the rhythm and say it and play it. Use the language center of the brain, which works more subconsciously on the mind body. I mean, the head isn't bad, it's a gift. And yet we also don't want to just live from here up. And same thing with when we're drumming. How do we feel it and just stop thinking about it and play? There are so many stories that I could share. But also I wanted to add, it is true that other cultures have their own ways of dealing with trauma and grief. And there are, for people who are interested, there are books, The Healing Power of the Drum by Dr.
Yeah,
Richard
it's
Redmond,
wonderful.
for instance, of how, and he's a Western practitioner, how he found that talk therapy was unable to touch on the grief that some of his patients had, and yet the drum was able to connect with that and like you said, release it.
Yeah.
And once you've released that, then what do you replace it with? How do we bring in new life? So I mean, there are some basic stories that I could share, such as one of my students in an adult djembe class, a man who had his own business and had his own staff that he was having to manage, and was up against, and he hadn't shared this with the group, but he was up against a really big decision about how to deal with a difficult member of his staff. And that's it can be a tricky place for someone who has a small business. And for him, drum class was a way for him to, like it is for a lot of people, it's like going to a yoga class. It's just a way, it's just for me. I'm leaving my children, leaving my workplace, leaving my responsibilities and my adulting, and this is for me to release and let go and just be. And one thing that he shared with us one day was that he said the week prior, he came to drum class with this thing in his head, this problem that he had about this member of his staff. And on the drive home after drum class, there was such a clarity happening in his mind, that the drumming had both dissolved the mental chatter,
Yeah.
relaxed the nervous system, and at the same time energized him so that his own inner knowing could bubble up and his own inner wisdom. And he told us that on that half-hour drive home, the answer came to him after weeks of struggling with it because he was thinking too hard about it. And when he was able to let go of the thinking and just be in the rhythm, it transformed. So that's one of them. But even, and that's a good one, I think. And it's not even one that I had thought of until you asked just now. But there are so many other stories too of just bringing multi-generations of people together in a drum circle, children, parents, and grandparents together, and figuring out how I can include all of them so that they can be in an experience together that doesn't require talking, nonverbal. There was a group of local men here where I live in Southwest Florida, and one of them had been a former student of mine. And when in his circle of men, there was one of them who had suffered a stroke, and they didn't want to all get together as friends to support him just to talk about the stroke or talk about what
Yeah.
was going on in their lives. They didn't want to get together and talk about politics or sports. They wanted a different activity. And my former student thought, oh, what if I have Barbara Gail come and bring drums? What kind of an experience might that bring? And so they hired me for 3 sessions to just be together and drum and have that experience, which transcended all of it. And it included the gentleman who had suffered a stroke. And I have fortunately worked with groups of people who had some kind of neuro, they were going through some kind of neurological rehabilitation, whether they had suffered a stroke or been in a motorcycle accident or born with something. And I had done drum circles with them and figuring out, okay, this person can hold and shake a shaker, and this person can hold a little beater of a drum, and I can put the drum in their lap. Special needs children who are literally in wheelchairs and have no verbal speech
Yeah.
abilities, but you can see that sparkle in their eye
Yeah. Yeah.
when I put a little drum on their lap, and they put their hand on that drum, and I stand in front of them and play my big mama drum, my big djembe,
Yeah.
and the drum head of the little drum in their lap resonates sympathetically with my big drum, and they feel the rhythm, and suddenly their eyes light up, and you know that there is a spirit in there, a soul in there, and the rhythm is speaking to them. And before you know it, all of these children at the special needs school, they're able to shake shakers and play drums in whatever physical way I have figured out for each of them individually. And so it can still unify people of just of all of it. I think that it's just, to me, it's so profound, whether it's someone who tells the story of their experience, like that gentleman on his drive home after class, or I just am the humble witness to something happening in this circle when people are playing the shakers and bells and drums and making harmony together. Children of different races, teenagers of different, well, I don't like to use the word race anymore because we're all just one race,
Yeah.
but from different backgrounds and cultures.
Yeah.
When I worked with a group of teenagers and college students at a summer camp in Maine, where uh, um, they were hosting some people of their own age group from South Africa. And Maine is a very homogenous place, but culturally can be kind of diverse because of their openness, yet pretty homogenous culturally. And they brought these South African high school and college age students as well. And they hired me to drum together. And so, yeah, the drum is just one of those things that can transcend and bring them all to a place together of unification and harmony. And yeah, so I hope I answered your
Oh
question.
yeah,
There are so many
totally. I
stories,
mean,
so many
as,
stories.
as I listen to you, I'm thinking also about how difficult it is to um, use words to express that experience, because I run drum circles and I've been into drum circles and I know exactly what you're discussing. The expression I use is a sense of real shared humanity beyond age, race, beliefs, cultural, political beliefs, you name it. It's beyond words, but it's very hard to describe to somebody who's not been in that experience, because I don't think our culture has words to describe something that does it justice. This sense of we're all one and yet different, this sense of like
Community.
it feels extraordinary.
Because we've lost that tribal sense as well.
Yeah.
We've lost that, we live in nuclear families, and even my father's generation, the great grandmother lived in the same home. There was still a sense of the tribe, and they lived kind of in an ethnocentric, as immigrants, ethnocentric community that had a shared culture and food, of food, and how they dressed, and how the language that they used. They kind of lived in a little bit of an in the early 1930s.
Yeah.
And now we move around the planet, which is amazing, and we live in a more nuclear family, or alone, and we might move to a new community, and then we need to find people of like mind, like heart,
Yeah.
like spirit, and we find community based on that. We're hungry for it. It's natural for us. We are social species, and yet, yeah, we have kind of lost that, and to do those nonverbal forms of communing, like drumming and dancing and singing. It's verbal, but it's musically. So I think
Yeah.
it uses a different part of the brain. We know that it does, actually. So yeah, I think you're right. I think you're spot on.
So one of the things I want to discuss as well is, empowering women, because we live in a culture that values above all external sources of knowledge. The idea that someone knows what's right for you, someone who has the right training, the right experience, some professor of some kind, education that is the type of education that is seen as valuable within the Western world. And so in the face of that, how does the work that you do, how does drumming and movement and how can help, especially women, because I think it's, from what I'm saying, is harder even for women to trust their inner voice. How can that help? How have you seen it, or how can you see it helping women, to empower women, and also helping them relearn to access their inner knowing?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I think it's still fairly new for contemporary women to find our voice, even if we look back in terms of just the in contemporary culture, the more mainstream things such as politics and sports. How have women played a role? We don't have to go too far back to see that women didn't have a voice and a place in those things. And even 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, whatever, could women even open their own bank account without being co-signed by a husband or a father? So just in everyday culture. Yeah. So where was our voice, and how can the drum, the song, the dance help us find our voice? And that is, I think, something that I've been tapping into more specifically in terms of women, mostly through the teachings of Layne Redmond and Ubaka Hill, another woman drummer who specializes in helping women to find their voice through the drum. And I think that, when we look at, here's another one of Layne's images, another woman drummer, and we say, oh, but guess what? She's actually a goddess, and that she was revered. And her name was Chabeli, and she was prolifically revered throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. And So this one dates back to about 5th, 4th century BCE, which is not that far back. But there were so many images of Cibele with her frame drum, and being a goddess, women could be like, oh, well, not only did women drum, but it was a feminine depiction of a deity who, and there were many goddesses, not just one. So there wasn't just one belief system, but she was the great mother goddess who beats the drum, the pulse of all life, that with one stroke of her drum, all the universe manifests. And before that, what was there? Just the primordial hum. And just as women give birth to humans, the stroke of the drum of the goddess is what gives birth to all that we know.
Yeah.
And so I think that women can, like, I remember for me, the first time I saw Layne's images of everyday women and priestesses and goddesses with the frame drum, and there were thousands and thousands of images that Layne unearthed that were terracotta or carved in stone or whatever. It's like, oh, well, this in itself is kind of empowering. And it doesn't really matter to me why women stopped drumming. I mean, they were literally forced to put down these tools of their empowerment. But I don't even think we need to talk about that anymore. I mean, it's knowledge to know. And yet at the same time, what happens now if we just start to drum, and what does that mean? And how do we drum differently than men? What is the feminine voice of the drum? You know, Cibele was a queen. This is her. She's on her throne. She has a crown, and the crown of her head demonstrates the fortress within which we all live. She was the great protectress. And she has her libation bowl where she pours forth the waters of life, and her frame drum. She's seated on her throne, and she's often depicted with lions, and sometimes the lions are small, but this time she's in a chariot on her throne with these
Pulled by
lions.
lions.
Yeah, pulled through lions. Here's the earth, the great mother goddess, the earth herself, the planet, hurling through space at 1,000 miles per hour, which translates to like 1,600 kilometers per hour. And we're just spinning and hurling at an unbelievable rate. And yet she loves us so much, she never lets us go. The earth herself. And she's drumming. So what happens if we come together and drum? What happens when women pick up the drum? I think that we can do it differently than men. I think we have a different voice, and I think we're still finding that. And I've found when I've had women's drum groups that I've directed, I would teach them and I would direct them, and there's that I'm the head of thing again, but also, yes, it's a musical instrument, and here are some techniques to play it so that your drum can sing, and then we co-create how this is going to work as a procession, as part of a ceremony or celebration in public, in the community. And when we come together, what is our voice like? Is it the same as, for instance, I saw on Facebook just yesterday, someone had posted in one of the drum forums, an amazingly talented group of young West African men playing all kinds of drums and percussion instruments. And it's loud, and it's fast, and it's intense. And I used to love that. And I'm almost repelled by it now because it's so masculine. It's almost such a peacock show. And there are my peacock feathers right there. It's such a peacock show of, I'm the loudest one. I'm the fastest one. Listen to me. And they're all soloing, and it's almost too much. And so what happens when women come together in a circle, and this time with their tambourines, and we are opening a summer solstice event in downtown Portland, Maine? What's our voice? And I think we've been gradually finding it. You know, we drum of different styles of drumming from different ethnic groups, if you will, because there are, as I said, there are no traditional cultures on the planet without some form of rhythm in its expression or dance. So we even included dancers in our procession. And women with playing a frame drum with a mallet.
Yeah.
A different style, from a different, and that's actually the most universal drum. No one can claim ownership to a hoop drum. Some try to, but there's no ownership there really. So,
What I love in the picture you're sharing here and what you're saying since the beginning of our conversation is that it's about being inclusive. You know, in a world, there's a thing that our world really likes to do, the modern world really likes to do is categorize things, right? This drum only, like, I have a story to share that when the first drum I got given was an Irish Baron.
Yes.
So I went to a shamanic drum workshop 10 years ago, 11 years ago, and I thought that's not going to work. And I had my mind blown so much because I was a scientist for 20 years and I tended to be really rational at the time. And so I went home to France and I said to my mum, I want a drum. And my mum said, well, I have this Baron that I bought in Ireland from the oldest Irish maker of Baron, Malachi Kearns, and brought this drum back. But my brother is a professional musician and he's trying to show me how to play it with that little stick that the Baron comes with. And I couldn't. So I came home. Luckily, I have a friend here I used to have a friend in Cambridge here in the UK who was a shaman and made drum from scratch. And he was like, I said, I can't play this drum, Peter. And he said, well, Sophie, what is it you want to do with this drum? Do you want to play in an Irish band? And I said, no, I want to just do shamanic drumming. And he said, well, then you do not need to learn to play this thing. And fast forward 10 years, last Christmas, I get given an adufe. I don't know if you ever heard about these drums.
What? Say it again, please.
For Christmas, this last Christmas, I got one of my presents was a square drum from Portugal that exclusively played by women called an adufe.
Yes.
And this is played with a mix of hand hitting and a stick, and there's jingly bits inside. And the women kind of, technically it's really difficult because the women kind of lift it in the air. But I thought I can just, beat it with a stick if I want, because with a mallet. And my brother said, you're going to have to learn to do it the proper way. And I remember thinking, I'm going to do whatever I want. I was going to say something less polite than this, but it's really interesting how, again, this idea of the right way and the lack of play. And yes, I'd like to learn to play. I went to a friend drum workshop last November and I loved it. And I'm going to a djembe workshop next month. And I love to play with lots of different drums, but I also really, really like the fact that in your picture there's all sorts of drums and dancers. And then none of that, this is only for people who play this type of drum. This is only you don't belong to a club unless you are only playing this style with this style, this style of drumming with this particular type of drum, because where is this again, this is masculine, I think, this idea of categorizing and the inclusivity in what you depict in your stories and pictures.
Who are the drum police after all?
Exactly.
And who assigned them to be drum police? After all, it is just a drum. And at the same time, like you said, wouldn't it be cool to actually take a moment to learn how to play that adufe drum with the jingles inside? How do you shake it to get the jingles and play it at the same time? There is a technique so that the drum could sing that way. But do you have to do that? Do you have to play the bowron with a tipper, or can you just play it with your fingers or with a beat?
Yeah.
And there are some people who really believe that not only is there one way to play that particular drum because it comes from that particular culture, and every culture gave birth to, there are so many different frame drums and their own styles and techniques, and so many different tambourines and their styles and techniques, and so many different goblet-shaped drums with their styles and techniques.
Yeah.
And is it so important that we only play it with the one technique that was birthed along with that particular folkloric instrument from that particular part of the world. But also I ask the question, is it so important that we have to be birthed into that bloodline in order to have permission to play that drum? And there are some people who believe that you are not worthy of playing a
Oh,
particular
yes, I know.
folkloric drum unless you're birthed into that bloodline. Now, on the one hand, I can understand that there are some drums that are more for very sacred and
Yeah.
deep, ancient styles of playing in their sacred rites, in their
Mm.
religion. And I can respect that for sure. And sometimes those same drums are played in more secular events that are just for community gatherings and celebrations and, that kind of event. So there is both, but to claim ownership, and the fact that you even mentioned a bodhran, which sometimes is called bowron, bodhran, depending on the region of Ireland. One of Layne's students was traveling through Ireland, and so we were all on a forum before Facebook was invented. We were on a Yahoo forum, and we were all asking, how do they pronounce it over there? And
Yeah.
the student of Layne's said, it depends on what town I'm visiting. When we go to this town and visit this pub, they call it this. And when we go to this town and this pub, they call it this. So it's a different pronunciation for the same instrument. But here's a little piece of information that I'd like to share that I don't share too often, but I think it's important to put out there. And it may not even be a very popular perspective, but I met a woman named Valerie Naranjo at a drumming conference back in, maybe it was around the year 2000, maybe 1999, I'm not sure exactly. A drumming conference that used to take place called Unity with a Beat, Drumming
Mhm.
for Wellness. And there were all kinds of amazing teachers
Yeah.
who moved through there. Layne Redmond was one of them, Ubaka Hill, Randy Crafton, Barry Bernstein, Valerie Naranjo. She was the first female percussionist on Saturday Night Live, which is a TV show that's been here in the States for over 40 years.
Mm.
She was the first female percussionist. They have their own live band. And she was also percussionist in the orchestra pit on Broadway for various shows like The Lion King, I believe, Lord of the Dance as well. Valerie was from the Ute, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, or Ute tribal people of the Southwest in the US. And after her experiences of playing on Broadway in the orchestra pit as a percussionist and a drummer, she went home to the reservation for like Thanksgiving or something like that, a big US holiday.
Mm.
And she saw people playing a hoop drum with a stick. And
Yeah.
she was like, oh my gosh, I've learned to play that in Lord of the Dance, that Irish song and dance Broadway show. And they call it a bodhran. And her father and uncle said, well, yeah, we call it a bodhran too. Where do you think we got it from? And they said, when the Irish immigrants were in the Southwest of the US building the railroads, they had brought their musical instruments with them, including their hoop drum that they called a bodhran. And we all thought, oh my gosh, how amazing. Here's a drum that we can play while we're dancing instead of just only the huge powwow drum that
Yeah.
several people stand around and play. So again, there's no group that can claim ownership to the most universal drum on the planet, which is a frame drum. I have one right here just to demonstrate. A frame drum, which is essentially a frame, whether it's circular or
Yeah.
square, like the one that you were talking about, whether it has a one drum head or a drum head on the back as well. This is the most universal instrument, the earliest depiction of which we see on a cave painting in Çatalhöyük in Turkey that dates back to 5800 BCE. That's like 8,000 years ago, just about. And so who can claim ownership? Who's the
Mm.
drum police here? Who
And
says,
who invented it?
and
Like,
who, yeah,
it's
who?
like I always think about, as you were sharing that, I'm thinking about some of the massage practice that I learned from South Africa, but some of my South African friends thinks it came from the slave trade.
Wow.
And people are convinced it's South American. But I found example of it all around the world. And my husband is from Hong Kong, and I'm married to a Chinese man. I'm French. I was born in Brittany. I'm married to a Chinese man. We have two mixed race children, and my husband often says, but it's like me saying only my family can do acupuncture, or only Chinese people can. And you know how the Italian have noodles, but people say that pasta came through the Chinese from the sort of, and I know I'm making food examples, but it's
all culture.
it's fascinating. It always fascinates me because I also have a friend who went to watch a new mother massage a baby in Ecuador and got a bit like your story with the hood drum. My friend's an anthropologist, and she said, "Oh, brilliant! I'm gonna see how traditional indigenous women massage their baby." She do the massage, and then she said, "How did you learn that?" And she said, "Oh, this book I got from the library, and it's a book written by a Western." But if she hadn't asked, the crossing of things for me, though, and what I'm loving is everything you're describing, from the range of like people playing it for pleasure and people taking it into an art, and all the landscape, the rich landscape of the completely amazing different styles of drums, different styles of dance, different style of way to play the drums, and dancing and singing, and the beauty of sharing that, and sharing that from a place of that it's open to everyone, and that
Openness.
people
Yeah.
should people can try and explore what's right for them, and not going I've been told that the type of drum circle I run, where we play with a beater on a frame drum intuitively, I've been told this is not music. And I find that really interesting because I'm like, define music.
Right. What is it then? Noise?
It's really interesting, isn't it? What falls within the category? At which point does it start to go into the box of what the Western world, in its very narrow view, considers to be music? And the thing that really, and I'm hearing that from you very clearly, the thing that I feel is the most important is to give the chance to people to try. And try, as you say, people who have physical limitation, that means they might not be able to do the very complex hand movement, that hand drumming, frame drumming with the hand is a lot more skilled than beating it with a stick. And what's more important? Is it more important that people do it right? I'm doing quotation marks with my finger here, or that people do it and they feel they have an experience of shared belonging.
Yes, exactly. What about groups of preschoolers that I've drummed with? And just helping them to distinguish between music and noise, in my definition, is the act of listening. When they're all just wailing away on their instrument and they have no consideration that they are in a group, and then I stop it and say, "Oh my gosh, was that music or noise?" And then we return to it, and they're listening now, and they're contributing to the group sound in a way that blends. Is that not music? Yeah, what defines music? Is music purely intellectual, or is it an experience within ourselves, whether we are playing alone or playing with others? What is the experience of music? And there were so many things that came to mind when you were telling that story. And one thing is, because there are ethnic specific forms of drum and music, and that's a beautiful thing. Culture is rich and amazing, and different, cultures, the way that humans express themselves through their food, through their clothing, through their music. And here I am, a white woman in America, playing a West African drum, the djembe. And there's a man who he's gone now, but his name was Babatunde Olatunji, who came to the US as a university student back in, I think it was like the 1940s or 50s. He came from Nigeria, I believe, if I have the story correct. It's been a long time since I've told it, but he wanted to learn to become an ambassador for his country. And when he came to the States, he thought we were just so culturally deprived. Where's the music? Where's the dance? That instead of becoming an ambassador for his country politically, he became an ambassador for his country through music and dance and founded Babatunde Olatunji's drum school in Harlem, New York, and the performing group, the Drums of Passion. And he taught people how to drum and how to dance. And he believed that no matter who you are and what your bloodline, lineage, ancestry is, no matter what your skin color, the drum, and we all know now, the drum, no matter what your bloodline and ancestry is, there were people who you are a descendant of who were drumming and singing and dancing, because that was just a universal thing. And sharing cross-culturally. They have found shards of bone fragments, I think, or ceramic pieces from that culture in Turkey that I mentioned before with the cave painting, Çatalhöyük, that shamanic culture from almost 8,000 years ago. They have found shards of that at Stonehenge in the UK. So people have been sharing culture, sharing stories, music, songs, dances around the campfire for millennia. So it's something that we all have in our lineage. And Babatunde said, no matter who you are, yes, you have permission to drum. And he believed no matter what the drum is, whether it's a West African djembe, with respect to the West Africans from which this drum hails, which is a drum that's only about 500 years old, as opposed to this drum, which as far as we know is, like 8,000 years old and probably older. No matter what the drum, we all have the instinct to drum, and we all are born to drum, whatever style. So the fact that this West African man gave us, all white folks here in the States, permission to drum, for me is, all I needed to say, yes, this just happens to be an instrument that I love to play, that I find is accessible for most people, that it balances the body and that it's played with both hands. And the rhythms that I share and teach to my students are rhythms that build their skills and help them to play together as a group. So yeah, I think that it's something that is for all of us.
I could talk to you all day,
Yes.
Barbara. I think I
Yes.
feel, we barely scratched the surface. It's such a deep and juicy topic, and I think that, that I'm sad that we have to wrap this conversation up. But before we do that, I'd like to ask you to tell people listening where they can find you.
Oh yeah, they can find me. So I have a website which has not been updated since I basically created it in 2018 when I was still trying to figure out what my next chapter was. But there on my website, which is Barbara Gail BarbaraGail.com, there is a contact page where they can sign up for my mailing list. And I'm not one of those people who sends out emails all the time. So I don't fill up people's inboxes only when I have an upcoming event, which is not only local classes, but also online and soon to be in-person retreats. That's what I've been working toward for a number of years in different places, because I have taught up and down all around the US, from California, Colorado, and up and down the East Coast. And I've had invitations all over the world. It's just a matter of the logistics. So if people want to know about that, they can also find me. I'm on Facebook. I'm pretty much on Facebook every night.
Yeah.
And so they can find me there and follow the things that I have going on and the things that I'm sharing and teaching. And things are still evolving. I focus a lot right now on the Tambourine path,
Yeah.
which is women's tambourine playing in the Layne Redmond tradition, which includes not just the technique and rhythm patterns, but more deeply the kinds of things that I talked about before, the herstory of the drum and the richness of the teachings, like why we drum and what is rhythm, the pulse of life. And so there's drum ritual, which also is part of the Layne Redmond lineage, and inner vision drum journeys that I take my students on, which is also part of the Layne Redmond lineage. So that's really kind of where I'm at right now. But as an alchemist, who knows what's next? But I think that those are two good places to begin to connect with me. I would love to hear from people. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. It was delightful to talk to you.
Likewise, Sophie, and I love your questions, and they were good food for thought for me as well. I think that I'll be contemplating these questions for the rest of the day and the rest of the week. And yeah, there's always more to the story behind the drum, the song, and the dance. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for tuning in.